Everybody John the Other here, obviously. And as you know, we are in the middle of a moral panic. On the news, we call this the Me Too movement. I've said before this is a vigilante movement, and I stand by that, but calling it this name only gives us a shallow picture. You are probably also familiar with the standard media talking point that Me Too is a really great thing, which is to say, feminist-oriented vigilante justice is a really good thing. Apparently. There's also a lot of female celebrities saying that if an arbitrary number of innocent men are destroyed, that's perfectly fine as well. The lives of innocent men are a price women supporting Me Too are quite happy to pay, apparently. There is, I would say, a sense of glee among media feminists when discussing the erasure of people's lives and careers. What also seems obvious is that women in media appear to be immune from any blowback for promoting what looks to me to be a psychopathic ethic. But that's just me. There is delight in the news each time a man of good reputation is burned to the ground by the fiat of an accusation, and when such accusations are shown by evidence to be lies, the clarity of the fraud connects directly to the volume of believe her screeching. Me Too believers will insist that their high emotion is the marker of truth and that visible facts should be ignored. I've also pointed out in the past that our laws are being rewritten with a clear goal of enabling vigilante justice within the actual courts. MGTOW and the Mike Pence rule make perfect sense in this climate, but these are not solutions that are repeatable over the long term. These are simply steps that men and companies are taking to reduce the chance of destruction based only on female whim and not evidence. But it's a mistake to attach malice or evil to female nature because of this. Just like men, women are subjected by media and education to almost constant social programming. The message women get, though, is different from the message aimed at men. For women, it goes something like this. Women are an oppressed class. Men are the perpetrators of that oppression. As a woman, your sexuality is pure and divine. Female spirit is the generative force of all good in the universe. For women, anything negative which happens to you is completely separate from any choice that you made, but instead is due to the negative influence of men. In contrast, men are naturally violent. Male spiritual nature is the source in the universe of all evil. Male sexuality is predatory and unnatural. Also, men don't exist as individuals. Instead, men are each samples of that larger mass of men, the force of oppression. So an individual man's lack of participation in the imagined universal oppression of all women doesn't matter. Heaping punishment on some particular man is a suitable and appropriate proxy for hating all men who are evil connected by hyphens. When we understand that belief like this is being constantly drip-fed to women through education and media, the idea that women are simply naturally evil is not just unsound, it's lazy. Any group of people socialized to believe this poisonous pablum would behave in the same way. There is no need for any inner natural evil to explain the present fashion of anti-male, antisocial behavior by women. But that doesn't change the fact of the manifested behavior towards men, which is both real and escalating. The assumptions behind normal relations between men and women are no longer valid assumptions. The ethic fed to women is that a type of sociopathic conduct by women towards men is both valid and good. It's good and it is to be rewarded with heroic status. And like the MGTOW or the Mike Pence rule, this is not a game that is repeatable over time. This means we need some new rules. But I'll begin with a couple of questions. What if men come up with ways for men and women to cooperate which avoids the damage and the carnage of current female against male hostile behavior? Let's assume we can innovate and create some interesting solutions. Will those solutions be used, or will they just be gamed and co-opted by the people now cheering for the destruction of civil rights like due process and calling false accusers heroes? I don't know the answer to that. In contrast to this, maybe it's up to women to somehow convey that they are not potential Me Too accusers, or is this something that men alone must find a way to navigate? And if so, how do you measure risk with no signal other than knowledge of a current sex panic? But maybe it should be that a man chasing romance or hiring a woman or working for a woman should face career-ending jail at any female claim without evidence. Maybe a society will emerge that can function with such a dynamic in operation. I tend to think the answer to that last question is no. Perhaps I lack imagination. But here's a few ideas I've had that might put our society back on a path away from chaos and destruction. Some of these ideas are honestly out there, which means a full explanation for each idea would take a long time, but I'm going to keep my descriptions as short as I can in the interest of brevity. I have 3 ideas, and here's the first one. In Canada, there has been a multi-year push for men to make sure that they have so-called affirmative consent and ongoing consent for all matters sexual. Without this, we are told all sex is rape. Of course, now, that's revealed as complete nonsense, because feminist lawmakers have just made documentation of consent non-admissible in a courtroom. This includes everything up to an agreement to sex, even if anyone was cautious enough to write such an agreement to get it signed. But this effectively makes women's signatures legally non-binding. By contrast, men's signatures remain the basis of contract law and all other civil agreements. But this is my observation of the current state of the law. So the only thing I'm suggesting here would be a public description and statement by lawmakers of this existing state of affairs. So before anyone calls me a misogynist or some other childish insult, I'm not suggesting a change to law here. I'm only describing as clearly as I can the existing and standing laws as created and enacted by feminists. The second idea I have is probably the most radical of the 3, so it might need the most detailed description. Here it is. To start, we'll return to the recognition that the legal climate is now at odds with how people actually deal with one another. Also, due to the cultivated moral panic, there's no way to tell who is going to turn pathological or begin to enact group-coordinated social death against you. I won't bother explaining what group-coordinated social death is. I think we all have seen enough to know what that is. So how do you sort out who may turn pathological in a social climate where aggression for bizarre ideological reasons is increasingly praised? To try to answer that, I'm going to use the existence of international trade associations to explain my concept. If you run a shipping company, you deal with laws and boundaries and jurisdictions and regulations that are always changing. These are sets of rules that overlap and interact as you move cargo around the world in the course of your business. And this makes the business of moving cargo around the world complicated, almost to the point of being impossible. So to deal with this, shipping companies use the rules of trade associations instead of trying to manage their dealings in an arbitrary number of regional legal systems. Now, to be fair, shipping companies do tend to conform to the local laws of the countries that they operate within, but they deal with other companies through the rules of trading associations because it's simpler and it's easier than trying to figure out how to cooperate across an arbitrary number of local legal systems that are constantly changing. So how can this work for private citizens? The use of privately created rules or rule sets rather than the now dysfunctional legal system is not suggested here as a framework for enforcement. Instead, participation in privately agreed on rule sets would be entirely voluntary. Participation would be used as a signal of social cooperation with other participants. In other words, this might be a way for people to know who is less likely to engage in group-coordinated social death against you. And although this idea is the most complex of the 3 I'm going to discuss here, this is all the detail I'm going to go into today in the interest of keeping this video short, or short-ish. If you want to see this expanded on, please let me know in the comments and I'll go into much more detail in another video. The final of my 3 ideas is probably the most entertaining, at least in its concept. This involves the creation of a new profession. It's a profession in which some women might make respectable careers for themselves. The simplest explanation for this new profession would be chaperone. Of course, in the post-feminist legal climate, there'd be a lot more to this than the traditional role of an auntie keeping tabs on horny teenagers. The idea would be a cross between a conventional lawyer, a notary, and a sexual escort, and maybe an accountant. This is not to suggest that a modernized chaperone would become sexually involved with their client. Rather, they would be an observer in all interactions with any woman that the chaperone's client had contact with. This would mean in business, in social situations, as well as in intimate sexual situations. Your chaperone would also be your lawyer and your accountant and probably a notary, and would also be in the bedroom with you. Your legal sexual chaperone sitting there reading a book, drinking tea, or maybe knitting a scarf while you and your date get horizontal and sweaty. So there you have it. Those are my 3 ideas. Thanks very much for listening, and as always, have a lovely, lovely day.